The most decorated combat pilot in the room that day was sitting in a middle seat, reading a romance novel, wearing a hoodie. And nobody knew. Not even the two F-22 pilots who were about to ask her permission to follow her orders. At 37,000 feet. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. It was a Sunday afternoon, October 8, 2017. The sky above Denver International Airport was clear and blue. The kind of perfect autumn afternoon that makes people feel good about traveling. Gate B-42 was busy with the usual Sunday crowd. Business travelers checking emails. Families wrestling with too much luggage. College students with headphones around their necks. Everyone moving with that particular mix of tiredness and purpose that airports always produce. United Airlines Flight 894 was scheduled to depart at 2:15 p.m. Denver to Reagan National, Washington, D.C. A Boeing 787-9 Dreamliner. One of the most advanced commercial aircraft ever built. Capable of carrying 243 passengers in smooth, pressurized comfort across 7,000 miles without breaking a sweat. The kind of aircraft that made flying feel routine. Safe. Boring, even. The boarding announcement came over the speakers. Group 1 first. Then Group 2. Then 3. When Group 4 was called, a woman stood up from a plastic chair near the window and joined the back of the line. She was in her early 50s. Maybe 5'6". Not tall, not short. Not thin, not heavy. Just average in every way that people use the word average when they really mean unremarkable. She wore faded blue jeans that had been washed so many times the color had gone soft. A gray University of Colorado hoodie with a small ink stain near the pocket that she had never quite managed to remove. Running shoes that had once been white and were now the color of old newspapers. Her short brown hair had threads of gray running through it that she had never bothered to dye. No makeup. No jewelry except a simple silver watch on her left wrist. A small backpack over one shoulder. And in her right hand, a paperback romance novel. The cover showed a muscular cowboy standing against an orange sunset, his shirt open, his jaw strong, his eyes gazing at something heroic just off the edge of the page. She shuffled down the jet bridge with everyone else. Found the aisle. Checked her seat number. Squeezed past a man already settled in the window seat and dropped into 14C, the middle seat, without any expression of complaint or resignation. Middle seats are the worst seats on any aircraft. Everyone knows this. People pay extra to avoid them. She had specifically chosen it because it was cheaper and because people in middle seats get left alone. Nobody wants to talk to the person in the middle seat. Nobody notices them. That was exactly what she wanted. She tucked her backpack under the seat in front of her, fastened her seatbelt, and opened her novel to page 127. The man who took seat 14D arrived 2 minutes later. He was in his mid-40s. The kind of mid-40s that comes with money and the confidence that money builds over time. His suit was Tom Ford, charcoal gray, fitted perfectly at the shoulders. His watch was a Rolex Submariner, the kind that costs more than most people's cars. His leather briefcase was Italian, dark brown, soft as butter, the kind that gets more beautiful with age and announces its quality without saying a word. His shoes were polished. His hair was cut by someone expensive. He smelled of cologne that came in a bottle shaped like an architectural statement. He glanced at the woman in 14C as he settled into his seat. His eyes moved from her worn running shoes to her faded jeans to her University of Colorado hoodie to the romance novel with the shirtless cowboy on the cover. The whole assessment took maybe 2 seconds. Then his lip moved, just slightly, in that micro-expression people make when they have decided someone is beneath their notice. Not a sneer exactly. More like the face you make when you realize the coffee you ordered is the wrong kind but you are not going to say anything about it. He shifted in his seat, leaning slightly toward the aisle, away from her. Creating distance. Not rudely. Not obviously. Just in that way people have of communicating without words that they are not interested in connection. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a laptop, put in wireless earbuds, and started a conference call. His voice was loud enough for 3 rows in every direction to hear how important he was. Words like quarterly projections and stakeholder alignment and synergistic growth opportunities floated through the cabin like expensive smoke. He laughed once at something someone said, a big comfortable laugh that filled the space around him as if it belonged there. His elbow hit the woman's arm during one expansive gesture. She did not look up from her novel. 5 minutes later his elbow hit her arm again. She turned a page. Her hands were very steady. Not rigid with suppressed irritation. Just steady, in the way of someone who has learned through long experience how to remain still when everything around them is in motion. To him, she was furniture. Forgettable. The kind of person you sit next to on a flight and cannot remember 20 minutes after landing. He did not speak to her. Did not acknowledge her. Did not make eye contact once for the entire time they sat together at the gate. In the row directly ahead, 13A and 13B, sat an elderly couple. The woman was in her early 70s, well dressed in a pink blazer, her white hair set in careful waves. The kind of woman who considers presentation important and judges others by the same standard. Her husband was a few years older, softer around the edges, more interested in the in-flight magazine than in whatever his wife was saying. She had been talking about their granddaughter's college applications since they sat down. Loudly enough that everyone nearby could hear, which did not seem to concern her at all. These state schools just don't have the prestige, she said, for what was probably the 4th time. Her voice carried that particular tone of someone who has decided their opinions are facts and facts do not need to be defended, only repeated. Not like the education our generation received. Standards are just not what they were. Earlier, while boarding, she had glanced back at the woman in 14C. It was one of those quick, automatic evaluations that people perform without thinking. A scan of the cheap hoodie. The worn shoes. The romance novel. The absence of anything that signaled status or importance. Her eyes had moved on in under a second, the evaluation complete. Nobody important. Probably works retail. Maybe between jobs. Certainly not someone whose opinion on education or anything else would be worth hearing. Her husband nodded at whatever she was saying, turning a page of the magazine. The flight attendants completed their safety demonstration. The engine spooled up. The aircraft rolled back from the gate, taxied to runway 35L, and at 2:22 p.m. lifted off into the blue Colorado afternoon. Nobody in the cabin gave the woman in seat 14C a second thought. Which was fine. Because what none of them knew, what the flight manifest listed only as, R. Mitchell, consultant, Denver, Colorado, what 243 passengers and 6 crew members had absolutely no idea about, was the truth about the unremarkable woman in the middle seat with the romance novel. Her name was Colonel Rebecca Mitchell. United States Air Force, retired. Age 52. She had flown F-15E Strike Eagles for 23 years. She had earned her wings in 1989, at a time when women in fighter cockpits were still a rarity and a controversy and something certain men in the Air Force muttered about in corridors. She had not noticed the muttering, or if she had responded to it the way she responded to most things, by going up in the aircraft and flying better than anyone else. She made captain by 1995. Major by 2001. Lieutenant colonel by 2007. Full colonel by 2012. Each promotion earned in the exact way promotions are supposed to be earned, through performance, through leadership, through the kind of results that make the people above you realize that arguing against her advancement would embarrass them more than her. She had logged 4,847 total flight hours. 1,923 of those hours were in active combat zones. She had flown 412 combat missions. Not training missions. Not simulated combat. Real missions, over real hostile territory, with real surface-to-air missiles tracking her aircraft and real people on the ground trying to kill her. Desert Storm. Iraqi Freedom. Enduring Freedom. And operations that carried no public names because they had never officially happened and never would. The Pentagon had 17 different medals with her name engraved on them. Most of them were stored in a vault that required 3-star authorization to open, because the missions those medals commemorated were still classified and would remain so for decades. The citations that would normally accompany such medals, the documents explaining what the recipient did and why it mattered, were themselves restricted documents requiring clearance to read. The Smithsonian Air and Space Museum had contacted her 6 times requesting her flight suit for their military aviation collection. She had declined every time. The patches on that suit referenced operations that officially never took place. She was not going to put them in a display case where people with cameras could read them. Fighter pilot training programs across the Air Force used her tactical decisions as case studies. Her name never appeared in these documents. She was referred to only as Sierra November, a designation that itself required a certain level of clearance to encounter. Young pilots studied her approaches, her split-second decisions, her ability to extract aircraft from situations the textbook said were not survivable, without ever knowing who Sierra November actually was. Her call sign, Viper, had come from Desert Storm in 1991. She had been 26 years old. A captain flying strike missions over Iraq in the opening weeks of the war. The targets were hard. The air defenses were serious. The margin for error was very small. She had developed a reputation among her squadron for something that was difficult to explain but impossible to ignore. She appeared from nowhere. Her aircraft materialized out of angles and altitudes that enemy radar systems were not scanning. She delivered her ordnance with a precision that made other pilots shake their heads in the debrief. And then she was gone before anything on the ground could respond. Her squadron commander, a colonel named Harrison who had been flying fighters since Vietnam, had watched her do this 3 times in a single week before he finally said what everyone else had been thinking. "You're like a viper in the desert," he told her after a mission debrief. "Nobody sees you until you strike. And by the time they do, it's already over." The name stuck. In the way that call signs stick when they are exactly right. By the end of Desert Storm, pilots who had never met her knew the name. By Iraqi Freedom a decade later, controllers in the Combined Air Operations Center requested her by call sign for the most difficult missions, the ones that required precision and nerve and the ability to make correct decisions in the space between seconds. She had landed a crippled F-15 on a carrier deck during a Pacific typhoon. The F-15 was not designed for carrier operations. It had never been tested for carrier operations. The carrier deck was moving through heavy seas, rising and falling in a way that made the landing window open and close unpredictably. Every other aircraft in the fleet had been grounded. She had a fuel emergency and no other option. She landed on her 3rd pass. The deck crew could not speak for several seconds afterward. She had extracted a downed reconnaissance team from behind enemy lines using a helicopter she had never been certified to fly. She had read the manual during the 40 minutes it took to reach the team's position. Navigated terrain that satellite imaging had assessed as impossible for rotary aircraft. Brought the team out with 2 minutes of fuel to spare and a main rotor blade that had been clipped by ground fire and was vibrating in a way that meant the aircraft had no right to still be in the air. She had commanded squadrons that did not appear in any public Air Force organizational chart. Flown aircraft that defense contractors publicly claimed were still years from operational capability. Executed missions that shifted the outcomes of conflicts the American public never knew were happening. But none of that was present in the cabin of United 894. What was present was a 52-year-old retired woman in a gray hoodie, sitting in a middle seat, on page 127 of a romance novel, not really reading. Her husband, James, had died 3 years earlier. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that announces itself late and moves fast. He had been fine in April. He was gone by September. They had been married for 24 years, and the house in Denver was very quiet afterward in a way that no amount of activity could completely fix. Her daughter, Sarah, worked at the State Department in Washington. Smart and driven and proud of her mother in a way she expressed more through achievement than through phone calls. They spoke every few weeks. It was not enough, but it was what the distance and the busyness allowed. Rebecca had retired 2 years ago. She had expected retirement to feel like relief. 23 years of combat deployments, of being responsible for aircraft and personnel and missions that carried enormous weight, of living with a level of stress that most people cannot imagine. She had expected that laying it down would feel good. It did not feel good. It felt like losing a language she had spoken her whole life. She had tried gardening. She had tried hiking. She had taken an online course in watercolor painting that she had abandoned after 3 sessions. She had read a great many romance novels. She had gone to a therapist 4 times and then stopped going, not because it was not useful but because talking about herself for 50 minutes felt wasteful in a way she could not shake. She was flying to Washington to see Sarah. The first visit in 8 months. She had deliberately chosen a middle seat. Cheaper fare. And middle seat passengers get left alone. Which, today, was exactly what she wanted. She had been on page 127 for about 20 minutes without actually reading a word. 43 minutes into the flight. 37,000 feet above eastern Colorado. The explosion happened without warning. It was not a sound exactly. It was a physical event. A shockwave that moved through the aircraft like a hammer striking a bell. The kind of impact that you feel in your chest and your teeth and the bones of your inner ear before your brain has processed what your senses are telling you. The aircraft shuddered. Violently. Not the gentle, rolling shudder of turbulence. This was hard and sudden and wrong in a way that was immediately clear to anyone who had ever flown in severe conditions. Rebecca's romance novel fell from her hands. Her training activated before her conscious mind had time to engage. 23 years of flying aircraft in situations where the wrong response meant death did not disappear when you handed in your uniform. It became instinct. It lived in the body. It responded faster than thought. She identified the frequency of the vibration. The acoustic signature. Turbine blade separation. An engine had not simply failed. An engine had come apart. She looked across the cabin to the windows on the right side of the aircraft. The number 2 engine, right side inboard, was destroyed. The cowling was gone. Fragments were still falling away from the wing. Fire was blooming where the engine had been, orange and black against the blue sky, and even from inside the cabin she could see that this fire was not contained. But the fire was not what her eyes went to next. She saw the shrapnel pattern. Saw the damage points on the wing surface. Saw where fragments had struck the fuselage. Her mind ran the calculation in the time it takes most people to blink. Multiple systems had just been compromised simultaneously. This was not a contained engine failure. This was the beginning of a cascade. A series of interconnected failures that would feed each other and multiply. The aircraft yawed hard to the right. The thrust imbalance between the destroyed right engine and the functioning left engine was trying to drag the nose sideways. She could feel the pilots fighting it through the airframe itself, through the way the aircraft responded to their control inputs, and she recognized instantly the overcorrection pattern of pilots who had been trained thoroughly for normal emergencies but never for this. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling panels. The distinctive mechanical thunk of 243 plastic cups falling simultaneously. People screamed. The businessman in 14D had gone completely pale. His laptop sat forgotten on his tray table. Both hands gripped the armrests with the white-knuckle desperation of someone who has just understood, physically and completely, that they are not in control of whether they live or die. He was not thinking about quarterly projections. He was not thinking about stakeholder alignment. He was thinking about his children, probably. About things he had meant to say and had not said. He had not looked at the woman in 14C. In row 13, the elderly woman was clutching her husband's arm with both hands. Her pink blazer was wrinkled now. Her carefully set hair had been disturbed by her own frantic movements. "George, what's happening? What do we do?" Her voice had lost every trace of the confident authority she had used when discussing educational standards. It was just fear now, naked and honest. George had no answers. The flight attendant's voice came over the PA, young, male, trying very hard for calm and not quite getting there. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with seatbelts fastened. We are experiencing some technical difficulties. Please put on your oxygen masks and remain calm. The captain and crew are working to resolve the situation." Technical difficulties. The corporate language of catastrophe. The words airlines train their people to use so that passengers do not panic. The words that mean something has gone very wrong, and we are not going to tell you exactly how wrong because the telling would make surviving it harder. Rebecca had already pulled on her oxygen mask. The motion was automatic, the habit of countless altitude chamber drills and actual high-altitude emergencies. She was calculating as she breathed. Glide ratio of a 787 with 2 engines failed. Terrain below. Weather. Possible landing surfaces within reach. A second explosion. This one forward. She identified the acoustic signature without hesitation. Avionics bay. An electrical fire had reached the forward equipment compartment. Navigation systems. Flight control computers. The aircraft was not just losing power. It was losing its brain. Thin smoke began filtering through the ventilation system. Not the dark, choking smoke of a structural fire. The thin, chemical, acrid smoke of electrical systems burning. The smell of insulation and circuit boards consuming themselves. The aircraft was dying. Not slowly. Not in a way that gave much time. Rebecca unbuckled her seatbelt. The click was small, but it cut through the sounds around it. The crying. The praying. The businessman's shallow, panicked breathing. Flight attendant Marcus appeared within seconds. He was 32 years old, had been with United for 6 years, and was experiencing the worst moment of his professional life. His face was white. His voice, when he spoke, was tight with the effort of maintaining the professional composure he had been trained to maintain. "Ma'am, I need you to remain seated. We are in an active emergency situation, Anne." "I know." Her voice was quiet. Not loud. But it had a quality that made Marcus stop talking immediately. A specific frequency of authority. The kind of voice that has given orders in situations where the orders had to be right because wrong orders meant people died. "I need you to get me to the cockpit right now." "Ma'am, the cockpit is secured. Nobody is permitted access during an emergency. It's a federal regulation and I cannot." Marcus. She had read his name tag. Filed it in the part of her mind that filed everything that might be useful. "Listen to me carefully. In approximately 90 seconds, this aircraft is going to suffer total hydraulic failure. When that happens, the pilots will have no powered flight control surfaces. This aircraft will become essentially uncontrollable for anyone who has never flown a combat-damaged aircraft with degraded hydraulics. There are 243 people on this plane. Their survival depends on someone getting to that cockpit right now who has done this before." Marcus stared at her. This middle-aged woman in a faded hoodie. Speaking with the calm precision of someone reading from a technical manual. Except she was not reading from anything. She was just knowing. "How do you know that? Who are you?" "Someone who has landed aircraft in worse condition than this one." She was already moving forward, her body automatically compensating for the aircraft's increasingly erratic motion, the balance of someone who had walked through combat maneuvers in fighter cockpits. "Get on the intercom. Tell the captain that Viper is aboard and requesting cockpit access. Tell him exactly those words. He will understand." Marcus reached for the intercom handset mounted on the forward galley wall. His hand was shaking. He keyed the cockpit channel. "Captain Richardson, this is Marcus in the forward cabin. I have a passenger requesting emergency cockpit access." He paused. This was the part that felt insane. "She says to tell you that Viper is aboard." Static. Then Captain David Richardson's voice. 51 years old. 19,000 hours. A careful, experienced, professional man who had been flying commercial aircraft for 26 years and had never once encountered anything close to this. His voice in the cockpit had been focused and controlled since the emergency began, the voice of a man applying everything he had ever learned to a situation that was exceeding everything he had ever learned. But when he heard the word Viper, something changed in his voice. Something that sounded like recognition striking him like a physical thing. "Say again. Did you say Viper?" "Yes, sir. Viper is aboard and requesting." "Let her in. Unlock the cockpit door right now." "Right now, Marcus." Marcus's hand moved to the door release before his brain had finished processing the instruction. The heavy cockpit door, reinforced after September 11th to withstand the kind of force a desperate person might apply, clicked open. Rebecca stepped through. The cockpit was a controlled nightmare. Warning lights covered the center panel, the overhead panel, the instrument cluster. Red and amber and white, blinking in patterns that told a story of systematic failure. Both pilots were fighting the controls. The yoke in Captain Richardson's hands was moving constantly, small corrections and larger ones, chasing an aircraft that kept trying to do things it was not supposed to do. First Officer Amanda Torres was on the radio with Denver Center, reading off system failures in the steady voice of someone who has been trained to communicate clearly in emergencies, a voice that costs enormous effort to maintain when everything you are feeling wants to express itself as a scream. Richardson looked up when Rebecca entered. His eyes went from her face to her hoodie to her worn running shoes and back to her face, and in that movement he was doing what every person on the aircraft had done. Categorizing. Evaluating. Expecting, for a fraction of a second, someone in uniform. Someone who looked the part. Someone who announced their authority through appearance. Then his training overrode the expectation. "You're Viper. You're the Viper." "Last I checked," Rebecca said, and she was already reading the instrument panels. Her eyes moved across the displays with the speed of complete familiarity. Not the careful, methodical scan of a student reading instruments for the first time. The instant intake of someone for whom this information is native language. "You've got hydraulic cascade failure. The number 2 engine disintegration sent shrapnel into your primary hydraulic lines. The fire hit the secondary system backup. You are running on the emergency accumulator right now and it is almost empty." Torres turned from the radio. 28 years of professional discipline warring with raw astonishment. How could you possibly feel the control response? It's mushy. Delayed. Dead zones getting wider. When hydraulic pressure drops below minimum, every powered surface on this aircraft freezes. Ailerons, elevator, rudder. All of it. You will have manual stabilizer trim and whatever differential thrust you can generate if we can get an engine restarted. That is all. She moved to the jump seat behind the center console, settling with the automatic efficiency of someone who has occupied cockpit observer positions hundreds of times. "When did you last fly something with no hydraulics?" Richardson's laugh had no humor in it. "Never. Training simulators do not cover total hydraulic failure. Combat pilots learn it on the job." Her hands were moving toward the overhead panel, reaching for emergency procedures she did not need to look up. The control inputs you need will feel nothing like what your training has taught you. The aircraft will respond late and over-respond when it does. You will need to anticipate it. Stay ahead of the aircraft. How do we stay ahead of an aircraft we cannot control? You can control it. It will just take everything you have and then more. She reached for the radio. "I need to make a call." Denver Center, this is a passenger aboard United Airlines Flight 894. I am transmitting under call sign Viper Actual and formally declaring an in-flight emergency. This aircraft has suffered catastrophic system failure including loss of both engines and imminent total hydraulic failure. We require immediate scramble of military assets from the nearest alert facility. We also require identification and clearance of an emergency landing surface. We need something long, straight, and flat. A highway section, dry lakebed, or military runway within glide range. The Denver Center controller had been handling the United 894 emergency for the past 7 minutes. He was experienced and capable and had been doing his job correctly. But the transmission that just came through his frequency was unlike anything in his training. United 894, Denver Center, we copy your emergency. Confirm you said Viper Actual. We require verification of authority before we can process a military asset request. Rebecca read off an authentication code. 14 characters, alphanumeric, delivered from memory at a pace that suggested she had used it before. Many times. The code was classified. Technically she was no longer authorized to use it. She used it anyway because 243 people were going to die if she did not. The response from Denver Center took 11 seconds. When it came back, the controller's voice had changed. Authentication confirmed. We are scrambling F-22s from Buckley Air Force Base immediately. Fighters will be airborne within 2 minutes. Viper Actual, we are also contacting Colorado and Montana State Highway Patrol regarding emergency landing options. We are identifying candidates now. Richardson had been listening. He turned to look at her again, this time differently. Who are you? Someone who really needs you to be flying the aircraft right now, Captain. The hydraulic failure alarm went off. Not a warning. An alarm. The kind of sound that means the thing you were afraid might happen has now happened. The pressure gauge on the hydraulic panel dropped from marginal to zero in the space of 4 seconds, as if someone had pulled a drain. Every powered flight control surface on the 787 froze simultaneously. The aircraft lurched. The nose tried to pitch up. Without hydraulic assist, the control surfaces were locked, and the aerodynamic forces that the hydraulics had been correcting were now unopposed. The aircraft became, in the space of that moment, a 200,000-pound projectile with wings and no steering. Torres made a sound that was not quite a word. Manual stabilizer, Rebecca said. Calm. Absolute. The voice of someone for whom calm is not the absence of fear but the management of it. Wheel, left side, half turn clockwise. Do it now. Richardson found the manual stabilizer wheel and turned it. The nose responded, slowly, reluctantly, like a very large animal being asked to change direction. Not fast. Not precise. But real. There, Rebecca said. You have control. It is not the control you are used to, but it is control. Everything you do from this point forward, you do slowly and deliberately. No sudden inputs. Think ahead of the aircraft. Anticipate where it will be in 30 seconds, not where it is right now. For minutes and 17 seconds after Rebecca's call to Denver Center, 2 shapes materialized off the right wing. F-22 Raptors. The most advanced air superiority fighters the United States Air Force operated. Each one worth approximately $150 million. Each one flown by a pilot who had competed against hundreds of others for the privilege of sitting in that cockpit. They appeared from the blue Colorado sky as if they had been there all along and had simply chosen to become visible. The lead pilot's voice came over the emergency frequency. Professional. Clipped. The voice of someone accustomed to emergencies. United 894, this is Viper 1, flight of 2 F-22s now visual on your position and ready to assist. Please advise on your current situation and intentions. Rebecca keyed the cockpit radio. Viper 1, this is Viper Actual. Current situation is 787, total hydraulic failure, both engines failed and restart attempts unsuccessful, approximately 41 minutes of glide time remaining. We are looking for a landing surface. I need you to run ahead of our position and find me the best section of Highway 287. Should be a straight, flat section south of our current track. I need length, width, and surface condition. And I need you to verify it is clear of traffic. There was a pause on the frequency. Longer than a tactical pause. The kind of pause that happens when information lands on a person harder than expected. Viper Actual, did you say, ma'am, is this Colonel Rebecca Mitchell? Call sign Viper. Desert Storm, Iraqi Freedom. Affirm. But we can do the reunion later, Lieutenant. Right now I need road clearance information. Another pause. Shorter this time. Ma'am, Viper 1 is requesting permission to operate under your tactical authority. Both aircraft, yours to command. Richardson's head turned so sharply toward Rebecca that the motion was almost comical. Torres stopped monitoring her instruments for 2 full seconds before Rebecca's voice pulled her back. Eyes forward, First Officer. Watch your descent rate. Denver Center's controller had been monitoring the tactical frequency. His voice came in carefully. Viper 1, Denver Center. Please confirm you are requesting to operate a military asset under the authority of a civilian passenger. Affirm, Denver Center. Viper Actual is former commander of the 57th Fighter Wing, 3 combat deployments, over 4,000 hours in fighters, more combat experience than anyone currently in our alert posture. If she is taking that aircraft to the ground, we are following her lead. Viper 1 requesting tactical clearance under Viper Actual's command authority. The frequency went quiet. In the Denver Center facility, supervisors were being summoned. Protocols that had never been used were being consulted. Phone calls were being made to people higher in the chain of command who needed to authorize something that no one had ever anticipated needing to authorize. The answer came back 2 minutes later. Viper 1, Denver Center. You are cleared to operate under Viper Actual's tactical authority. All civilian traffic in the corridor is being diverted. Military airspace cleared. You have priority handling on all frequencies. In the cockpit of United 894, nobody spoke for a moment. Richardson and Torres were both processing what they had just heard. 2 of the deadliest aircraft in the American arsenal, flown by 2 of the most elite pilots the Air Force produced, had just formally placed themselves under the command of the woman in the University of Colorado hoodie who had been reading a romance novel in seat 14C 40 minutes ago. Rebecca Mitchell did not appear to find this remarkable. Raptor 1, she said into the radio. Go find me that highway. The lead F-22 accelerated away from them, dropping to a lower altitude to survey the terrain ahead. Its wingman held position off the 787's right wing, close enough to observe, far enough to give the larger aircraft room. Then, something unexpected happened. Raptor 1 came back on the radio. His voice was calm but carried something deeper underneath it. Viper Actual, Raptor 1. Request permission to render honors. Both aircraft. Rebecca paused for just a second. Go ahead, Raptor 1. Yes ma'am. Both F-22s pulled up alongside the 787. Left wing. Right wing. 1 on each side. Flying in perfect formation with a damaged commercial aircraft limping toward a highway in Wyoming. Then simultaneously, both fighters rolled. Clean, slow, deliberate. Left wing down, right wing up, a full victory roll executed in perfect unison. Mid-air. Right beside them. In the cabin, passengers saw it through the windows. Nobody understood what it meant. People pressed their faces against the glass, confused, frightened, wondering why military jets were rolling beside them. But in the cockpit, Richardson and Torres understood immediately. Richardson's eyes went wet. He said nothing. Torres whispered, they're saluting her. Rebecca looked straight ahead at the highway coming up in the distance. Her jaw was tight. Her hands were still. She keyed the radio once. "Thank you, Raptor 1. It is an honor, ma'am. Now let's bring them home." In the cabin behind the cockpit door, Marcus had returned to the passengers. He could not tell them what was happening in the cockpit. He did not have the words for it. He told them the crew was working on the situation and that they should remain calm and keep their seatbelts fastened. He said it in the voice of someone who knows that calm is impossible but is asking for it anyway because it is better than the alternative. The businessman in 14D was holding his phone with both hands, typing messages with shaking thumbs. He had taken off his jacket. The Tom Ford suit jacket that had cost more than most people's monthly rent was folded on the empty tray table in front of him, and he sat in his white dress shirt with the collar open and the sleeves pushed up and the Rolex on his wrist, and he looked, for the first time, like a human being rather than a performance of success. He was texting his children. The messages were short because his hands would not stay still enough for long ones. The elderly couple in row 13 were holding each other. The woman's head was on her husband's shoulder. The confident declarations about educational prestige and declining standards had gone somewhere that felt very far away. She was simply a frightened person holding the person she loved, which is what most people are when the performance falls away. Rebecca did not see any of this. She was in the cockpit, talking Richardson through control inputs, monitoring systems, running calculations on approach speed and descent rate and the physics of putting a commercial airliner on a two-lane highway in the mountains of Colorado. Viper Actual, Raptor 1, has visual on Highway 287, south of Tie Siding, Wyoming. We have a straight section running northeast to southwest, approximately 6,800 usable feet. Surface is dry asphalt, good condition. Montana Highway Patrol has been notified and is establishing traffic blocks at both ends of the section. Civilian vehicles are clearing. Wind is calm at the surface. Visibility is unlimited. Recommend approach from the southwest. Rebecca ran the numbers. A 787-9 at its current weight, with no hydraulic power, no engine thrust, and degraded control authority, needed approximately 10,000 feet to stop under normal conditions. They had 6,800. The margin was not comfortable. But comfort was not what she was calculating for. She was calculating for possible. What is the road surface at the threshold, she asked. Paved shoulder, gradual approach, no obstacles within 200 feet of the threshold. There is a small bridge approximately 4,200 feet from the threshold but the load rating should support the aircraft weight. Should. Ma'am, it's Wyoming. The bridge is rated for agricultural equipment. I'd say there's about a 90% chance. I have flown on worse odds, Rebecca said. Raptor 1, take position ahead of us and mark the threshold. When we are on final, talk me down. Copy, Viper Actual. Raptor 1 moving to lead position now. She turned to Richardson and Torres. Both of them were watching her in the way people watch someone who they have decided to trust completely, the way people look when they have transferred responsibility for their lives to another person and are holding on. Listen to me, she said. What I am about to tell you will feel wrong. Everything your training has told you about landing an aircraft will argue against what I am asking you to do. But I have put aircraft on runways shorter than this with less control authority than we have right now. I have done it on aircraft never designed to land where I landed them. I have done it once on a carrier deck in a typhoon in an aircraft that had no business being near a carrier. So when I tell you something, I need you to do it without hesitation. Not because I want the authority. But because hesitation is the one thing that will definitely kill us. Richardson said, tell us what to do. Torres said, we're listening. The approach took 11 minutes. Rebecca walked them through it piece by piece. The descent rate. The airspeed. The control inputs that would feel too large and needed to be made smaller. The way the aircraft would respond to the ground effect as they descended through the last 100 feet, how the air compressed between the wings and the surface would try to balloon them, and they would need to use that balloon rather than fight it. The F-22 ahead of them marked the threshold, its running lights bright against the late afternoon sky, then pulled up and circled back. Looking good, Viper Actual. You are on centerline. Altitude 2000. Airspeed 182. Slightly fast, Rebecca said quietly, more to herself than to anyone. Richardson, 2 degrees nose up. Bleed 10 knots before we cross 500 feet. Richardson made the input. Slowly. Deliberately. The aircraft responded with its new reluctance, the sluggish compliance of a machine with damaged controls, but it responded. The highway appeared ahead of them through the windscreen. Not a runway. A road. 2 lanes of asphalt cutting through open rangeland with mountains in the distance and emergency vehicles scattered at the edges, and 2 tiny silver shapes that were Montana Highway Patrol vehicles parked at the far end. Altitude 500, Torres called. Airspeed 171. Better, Rebecca said. Begin your flare. Gentle back pressure. Do not rush it. Feel for the highway the way you would feel for a runway in low visibility. Trust your hands. Altitude 200. Airspeed 168. Good. Keep the pressure. You are going to feel the balloon starting now. The ground rushed up and then seemed to slow as the ground effect took hold, the cushion of compressed air doing exactly what Rebecca had said it would do, pushing back against the aircraft's weight, trying to float them. Use it, Rebecca said. Don't fight it. Let it slow you. Back pressure steady. Altitude 50. Airspeed 161. Flare. Hold it. Hold it. The main gear touched. The sound was enormous. Rubber meeting asphalt at 161 knots is not the gentle chirp of a normal landing. It was a shriek, a sustained violent protest from tires never designed for a surface this narrow at this speed. The aircraft bounced. Not high. Just enough to be airborne again for a single terrifying second before Richardson corrected and they came down again, harder, final. Spoilers up, Rebecca commanded, reaching past Torres to pull handles she had already identified. Maximum brakes. Steady pressure, do not pump. Steady. The deceleration was violent. Without hydraulic assist on the brakes, the effort required to slow the aircraft was enormous, and even at maximum application the runway numbers were consuming themselves at a pace that was brutally honest about how small 6,800 feet actually was. Emergency vehicles at the sides were moving, pulling back, clearing the surface ahead. The bridge came and went in a blur. The 90% held. 3,000 feet remaining. The brakes were beginning to smoke. Rebecca could smell it even in the cockpit, that sharp chemical smell of rubber and metal pushed past their designed limits. 2,000 feet. Come on, Richardson said under his breath. Not to the aircraft. To physics itself. To whatever governed the relationship between mass and deceleration and the space available. 1,000 feet. Torres had stopped calling numbers. She was just watching. 500 feet. 200 feet. The aircraft stopped. The nose was pointing at a stand of pine trees at the edge of the highway where the asphalt ended and Wyoming simply began. The distance between the nose of the aircraft and those trees was later measured at 22 feet. The cockpit was silent. For a long moment nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the tick and groan of cooling metal, the distant wail of approaching emergency vehicles, and the ragged breathing of 2 pilots who had just been through something they would spend the rest of their lives processing. Rebecca keyed the radio. Raptor 1, Viper Actual. We are on the ground. Aircraft is secure. All passengers and crew are alive. No injuries reported. The response took a moment. Viper Actual, Raptor 1. Copy your transmission. The F-22 pilot's voice had something in it that went beyond the professional composure of tactical communication. Something that sounded like awe encountering the limits of language. "Ma'am, I have been flying fighters for 11 years. I have never seen anything like what you just did. That was the greatest piece of aviation I have ever witnessed in my life." "Thank your training program," Rebecca said. "They teach it right." The evacuation took 40 minutes. Emergency slides deployed. Passengers came down in groups, assisted by Marcus and the other flight attendants who had been performing quiet heroism of their own throughout the event, keeping people calm, keeping people seated, keeping people breathing, without knowing what was happening in the cockpit or whether it would end the way it ended. Buses arrived from Thai siding and from Laramie. Passengers sat on the grass beside the highway in the late afternoon sun, wrapped in emergency blankets, some crying, some making phone calls, some simply sitting and looking at the sky with the expression of people who have been reminded of something important that everyday life tends to obscure. Rebecca came down the evacuation slide last, after both pilots and all crew had confirmed every passenger was out. She had her backpack. She had her romance novel, which had somehow ended up back in her hands. She walked to the grass and sat down and looked at the aircraft standing still on the highway, impossibly large for the space it occupied, its nose 22 feet from a stand of Wyoming pine trees, and she thought about James, who had died 3 years ago and who had always said that she was the most capable person he had ever met, and she thought about Sarah, who she was supposed to see tomorrow, and she thought about retirement and silence and watercolor painting classes abandoned after 3 sessions. The businessman from 14D approached her 20 minutes later. He had been sitting nearby. She had noticed him without looking at him, in the way she noticed everything, peripherally and completely. He had been on his phone for a while. Then he had put the phone away and just sat there. Now he walked to where she was sitting and stood in front of her with his jacket over his arm and his expensive shirt wrinkled and his Rolex catching the late afternoon light, and his face carried an expression that had nothing to do with success or status or the careful presentation of importance. It was just a face. Embarrassed and earnest and very human. "Ma'am," he said. "I don't know where to start. I don't know how to say this." He stopped. Started again. "I saw you when I sat down. I made assumptions. I looked at your book and your clothes and I decided you were nobody." He stopped again. "You saved my life. You saved all of our lives. After I looked right through you like you were nothing." Rebecca looked at him. She was tired in the deep way of someone who has spent everything they had and is only now beginning to feel the cost of it. But she was not unkind. "You saw someone in a cheap hoodie reading a cheap book," she said. "You made the conclusions that the evidence suggested. Most people do that. It's not a character flaw. It's how humans process information." "It is a character flaw," he said. "I know it is." "Maybe," she said. "But you were also texting your children when you thought you were going to die. That's not nothing." He stood there for a moment. "Are you going to be on the news? I want my kids to know who you are." "No," she said. "I'm not going to be on the news." He nodded slowly. "Is there anything I can do? Anything at all?" She looked at him for a moment. "Go home and call your kids in person instead of texting them," she said. "That's something." He nodded again. Walked away. The elderly woman from row 13 came to her a few minutes later. Without her husband. Alone, holding her purse with both hands, standing at a slight distance as if uncertain of her welcome. "I don't know if you noticed us," she said. "We were in front of you. My husband and I." "I noticed," Rebecca said. The woman seemed to have rehearsed something and then abandoned it. "I was being very foolish this afternoon," she said finally. "About all sorts of things. I think I forget sometimes that I don't know as much as I think I do." "It happens to everybody," Rebecca said. "You were very brave." "I was doing my job," Rebecca said. 20 years late, technically. But still my job." The woman nodded, squeezed her purse, and walked back to her husband, who was watching from a distance with the expression of a man who is relieved he does not have to say anything. Captain Richardson found her last, just as the buses were beginning to load. He stood in front of her in his uniform, which was somewhat less crisp than it had been that morning, and looked at her with an expression she recognized. It was the expression pilots sometimes get after surviving something they were not supposed to survive. A mixture of gratitude and awe and the specific humility that comes from having been helped by someone better than you in a moment when being helped was the only option. "Colonel Mitchell," he said. "David," she said. She had read his first name somewhere in the cockpit. "I have been flying for 26 years, he said. "I have never experienced anything like what you did today." "You flew the aircraft," she said. "I just talked." "You did considerably more than talk. You and Torres did the hard part. You maintained control of a 787 with no hydraulics and no engines. That is not nothing. That takes real skill and real nerve." He was quiet for a moment. "What happens now? For you?" She looked at the aircraft on the highway. The buses. The emergency vehicles. The passengers in their emergency blankets in the last light of the afternoon. "I'm going to get on a bus to Laramie," she said. "Catch a flight tomorrow morning. Go see my daughter in Washington." "That's it? That's it?" He shook his head slowly. "They're going to want to give you things. Awards. Television appearances. They can want that all they like," she said, and picked up her backpack. 3 weeks later, the story was everywhere. Not because Rebecca Mitchell had sought attention. She had not. She had given one statement, to Air Force Times, and declined every other interview request. The Today Show. CNN. 60 Minutes. Good Morning America. She declined them all politely and completely. The statement she gave to Air Force Times read, in full. "My name is Colonel Rebecca Mitchell, call sign Viper, United States Air Force retired. I flew F-15E Strike Eagles for 23 years before retiring in 2015. On October 8 of this year, I was a passenger aboard United Airlines Flight 894 when the aircraft suffered catastrophic mechanical failure. I assisted the flight crew with the emergency landing. All 243 passengers and 6 crew members survived without injury. I was not the hero of this event. Captain David Richardson and First Officer Amanda Torres flew the aircraft under conditions that exceeded anything their training was designed to address. They did so with skill and composure. They are the ones who deserve recognition. People saw me board that flight and saw a middle-aged woman in inexpensive clothes reading a romance novel. They made reasonable assumptions based on available evidence. That is fine. I have spent most of my career being invisible when I chose to be, and visible when the situation required it. October 8 required it. When 2 F-22 pilots requested tactical clearance under my authority, when they deferred command to a passenger in seat 14C, that was not about me. It was about something larger than me. It was about what we build in people when we train them right. It was about the culture of the fighter community, where capability is respected regardless of rank, age, or what you are wearing when you walk through the door. The uniform does not make the warrior. The warrior makes the uniform. I am Colonel Rebecca Mitchell. I was seat 14C. I would do it again tomorrow without hesitation. Next time, though, I am requesting an aisle seat. The statement was shared 4.7 million times in the first week. The Air Force formally acknowledged her service for the first time in years, declassifying just enough of her record to confirm the broad outlines of what she had done across 23 years. The full record remained classified. The names of the operations remained redacted. The specific details of what Sierra November had accomplished in hostile airspace over 3 decades remained locked in vaults requiring 3-star authorization to open. The Smithsonian Air and Space Museum sent a 7th request for her flight suit. She declined again. The romance novel she had been reading, a book called The Cowboy's Promise, by an author named Linda Ferris who had never appeared on any bestseller list, sold 340,000 copies in the 6 weeks following the news coverage. Linda Ferris, who had been writing romance novels for 11 years with modest success, gave an interview saying she was delighted and confused and hoped whoever the pilot was had enjoyed the ending. Rebecca did eventually finish it. She thought the ending was satisfying. She visited Sarah in Washington for 2 weeks. They talked more than they had talked in years. They argued about politics, which had always been how they showed affection. They ate at a Thai restaurant near the State Department that Sarah loved and Rebecca found too spicy but pretended otherwise. On the flight home, she booked an aisle seat. She slept the whole way.